Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back, everybody. Oh, I had a technical difficulty. Couldn't get this to work for an hour. And welcome back, everybody. Oh, couldn't get this to work for an hour. Well, I'm back again. Let's fix it. Let's fix this. So, again, welcome back. It's August 26th, 2024. The time now is now 10:42 p.m. Eastern Time. Hope everybody had a great Monday. We're going to continue on the subject of alien interview. I believe yesterday we did the history of Earth, where an alien was interviewed, alien or extraterrestrial Earl was interviewed by a military nurse in 1947. This is based on her transcripts and notes. She wrote a letter to a writer to disclose all the information before her death. She was on her way to passing, so she wanted to make sure that the world knew what happened in the Roswell crash. Let's see here. Before I get started, just make sure this is working properly. Just give me a thumbs up if this is working properly. Since it didn't work properly an hour ago. And let me just change the title for you guys. So this part of the interview, I think it's going to be talking about the science, the ET or the extraterrestrial science, and how they do things. Let me change that. Yeah, I mean, it's been a while since I've had technical difficulties. What's good? Keeps me on my toes. All right, let's get started here. Just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me clearly. Can you hear me now? I want my $2. Can you hear me now? All right. Let's see where we were at. Let me tell you, this is a very interesting, story, event, experience by this military nurse. Okay. Again, this is Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy's personal notes, transcripts of a top secret interview with an extraterrestrial Earl from the Roswell incident. Official transcript, top secret official transcript of the U.S. Army Air Force, Roswell Army Air Field, 509th Bomb Group. Subject is alien interview, 1947. Matilda's personal notes regarding a lesson in science. This is the extraterrestrial speaking to the nurse Matilda regarding the science of the Earth and the science of the universe. It states the transcript of this interview is verbatim. There is nothing more I can add. It says everything. So here we go. Today, Earl told me about some very technical things. I took a few notes to remind myself so I can repeat what she said. As closely as possible. She began with an analogy about scientific knowledge. Can you imagine how much progress could have been made on Earth if people like Johannes Gutenberg, Sir Isaac Newton, Benjamin Franklin, George Washington Carver, Nikola Tesla, Jonas Salk, and Richard Trevithick, and many thousands of similar geniuses and inventors if they were living today. Imagine what technical accomplishments might have been developed if men like these had never died. What if they were never given amnesia and made to forget everything they knew? What if they continued to learn and work forever? What level of technology and civilization could be attained if immortal spiritual beings like these were allowed to continue to create in the same place at the same time for billions or trillions of years? Essentially, the domain is one civilization that has existed for trillions of years with relatively uninterrupted progress. Knowledge has been accumulated, refined, improved upon in nearly every field of study imaginable and beyond imagining. Originally, the interaction of ISB spiritual beings, illusions, or inventions created the very fabric of the physical universe, the microcosm and the macrocosm. Every single particle of the universe has been imagined and brought into existence by ISB spiritual beings. Everything created from an idea, a thought with no weight or size or location in space. Every speck of dust in space, from the size of the tiniest subatomic particle to the size of the sun, or a megalantic cloud the size of many galaxies, was created from the nothingness of a thought. Even the tiniest individual cells were contrived and coordinated to enable a microbial entity to sense and to navigate through infinitesimally small spaces. These also came from an idea thought up by an ISB spiritual being. You and every ISB spiritual being on earth have participated in the creation of this universe. Even though you are now confined to a fragile body made of flesh, you live for only 65 short rotations of your planet around the star. You have been given overwhelming electric shock treatments to wipe out your memory. You must learn everything all over again each lifetime. In spite of all these circumstances, you are who you are and will always be. And deep down, you still know that you are and what you know. You are still the essence of you. How else can one understand the child prodigy? An ISB spiritual being who plays concertos on a piano at the age of 3 years old without formal training? Impossible. If they did not simply remember what they have already learned from thousands of lives spent in front of a keyboard in times untold or on planets far away, they may not know how they know. They just know. Humankind has developed more technology in the past 100 years than in the previous 2,000 years. Why? The answer is simple. The influence of the old empire over the mind and over the affairs of mankind has been diminished by the domain. A renaissance of invention on Earth began in 1250 AD with the destruction of the old empire space fleet in the solar system. During the next 500 years, Earth may have the potential to regain autonomy and independence, but only to the degree that humankind can apply the concerted the concentrated genius of the Isby spiritual beings on earth to solve the amnesia problem. However, the cautionary note, the inventive potential of the Isby spiritual beings who have been exiled to this planet is severely compromised by the criminal elements of the Earth's population, specifically politicians, warmongers, irresponsible physicists who create unlimited weapons, such as nuclear bombs, chemical weapons, diseases, and social chaos. These have the potential to extinguish all life forms on Earth forever. Even the relatively small explosions that were tested and used in the past 2 years on Earth have the potential to destroy all of life if deployed in sufficient quantities. Larger weapons could consume all of the oxygen in the global atmosphere in a single explosion. Now, what she's talking about here, the extraterrestrial, obviously, the atomic bombs and the nuclear weapons were exploding prior to 47, throughout and past 47, where we were testing these atomic bombs, which was affecting the other dimensions. Therefore, the most fundamental problems that must be solved in order to ensure that Earth will not be destroyed by technology are social and humanitarian problems. The greatest scientific minds of the Earth, in spite of the mathematical or mechanical genius, have never addressed these problems. Therefore, do not look to your scientist to save Earth or the future of humanity. Any so-called science that is solely based on the paradigm that exists is composed only of energy and objects moving through space is not science. Such beings utterly ignore the creative spark originated by an individual Isby spiritual being and collective work of the Isby's spiritual beings who continually create the physical universe and all universes. Every science will remain relatively ineffective or destructive to the degree that it omits or devaluates the relative importance of the spiritual spark that ignites all of creation and life. So what they're saying is science without spirituality is not going to do anything for us. It's only going to take us further to destruction. And then they get into religion without science would also affect us and affects us in a negative way. Unfortunately, this ignorance has been very carefully and forcefully installed in the human beings by the old empire. This is to ensure that the Isby spiritual beings on this planet will not be able to recover their innate ability to create space, to create energy, matter, and time, or any other component part of the universes. As long as awareness of the immortal, powerful, spiritual self is ignored, humanity will remain imprisoned until the day of its own self-destruction and oblivion. Do not rely on dogma of physical science to master the fundamental forces of creation any more than you would trust the chanted incantations of an incense-burning shaman. The net result of both of these is entrapment and oblivion. Scientists pretend to observe, but they only suppose they see, or they only suppose that they see, and call it fact. Like the blind man, a scientist cannot learn to see until he realizes that he is blind. The quote unquote facts of Earth science do not include the source of creation. They include only the result or byproducts of creation. The quote unquote facts of science do not include any memory of the nearly infinite past experience of existence. The essence of creation and existence cannot be found through the lens of a microscope or a telescope or by any other measurement of the physical universe. One cannot comprehend the perfume of a flower or the pain felt by an abandoned lover with meters and calibers. Everything you will ever know about the creative force and ability of a God can be found within you and immortal spiritual beings. How can a blind man teach others to see the nearly infinite gradients that comprise the spectrum of light? The notion that one can understand the universe without understanding the nature of a spiritual being is as absurd as conceiving that an artist is a speck of paint on his own canvas, or that the lace on a ballet shoe is a choreographer's vision, or the grace of a dancer, or the electric excitement of opening night is the excitement of opening night. Study of the spirit has been booby trapped, quote unquote, by the thought control operation through religious superstitions they instill in the minds of men. Conversely, the study of the spirit and the mind have been prohibited by the science, which eliminates anything that is not measurable in the physical universe. Science is the religion of matter. It worships matter. The paradigm of science is that creation is all and the creator is nothing. Religion says that the creator is all and the creation is nothing. These two extremes are the bars of your prison cell. They prevent observation of all phenomenon as an interactive whole. Study of creation without knowing the Isby spiritual being, the source of creation, is futile. When you sail to the edge of the universe conceived by science, you will fall off the end into an abyss of dark, dispassionate space and lifeless, unrelenting force. On Earth, you have been convinced that the oceans of the mind and spirit are filled with gruesome, ghoulish monsters that will eat you alive if you dare to venture beyond the breakwater of superstition. The vested interest of the old empire prison system is to prevent you from looking at your own soul. They fear that you will see in your own memory the slave masters who keep you imprisoned. The prison is made of the shadows in your mind. The shadows are made of the lies and pain and loss and fear. The true genius of civilization are those Isbys who will enable other spiritual Isbys to recover their memory and regain self-realization and self-determination. This issue is not solved through enforcing moral regulation on behavior or through the control of beings through mystery, faith, drugs, guns, or any other dogma of a slave society. And certainly not through the use of electric shock and hypnotic commands. The survival of Earth and every being on it depends on the ability to recover the memory of skills you have accrued through the trillennia, to recover the essence of yourself. Such an art, science, or technology has never been conceived in the old empire. Otherwise, they would not be resorting to the quote-unquote solution that brought you to your current condition on Earth. Neither has such technology ever been developed by the domain. Until recently, the necessity of rehabilitation of an Isby, or spiritual being, with amnesia has not been needed. Therefore, no one has ever worked on solving this problem. So far, unfortunately, the domain has no solution to offer. A few officers of the domain's force have taken it upon themselves to provide technology to Earth during their off-duty time. These officers leave their quote-unquote doll bodies, which is, let's just call it artificial bodies, at the space station. And as an ISB or spiritual being, as they assume or take over a biological body on Earth. In some cases, an officer can remain on duty while they inhabit and control other bodies at the same time. So there's this extraterrestrial saying that the extraterrestrials can embody more than one body at the same time. This is a very dangerous and adventurous undertaking. It requires a very able ISB spiritual being to accomplish such a mission and return to base successfully. One officer who did this recently, while continuing to attend his official duties, was known on Earth as the electronics inventor, Nikola Tesla. And again, I've read in the past, there was a paper that stated that Nikola Tesla was a Venusian that was made to incarnate in the 1800s. And this is why he had all the ideas, and this is why he was, he and others like him were creating communications with space, trying to send signals to space, and all the technology that he was creating in the late 1800s. It is my intention, although it is not a part of my mission orders, to assist you in your efforts to advance scientific and humanitarian progress on Earth. My intention is to help other ISB spiritual beings to help themselves. In order to solve the amnesia problem on Earth, you will need much more advanced technology as well as social stability to allow enough time for research and development of techniques to free the ISBs from the body and to free the mind of the ISBs. Although the domain has a long-term interest in maintaining Earth as a useful planet, it has no particular interest in the human population of Earth, other than its own personnel here. We are interested in preventing destruction, as well as accelerating the development of technologies that will sustain the infrastructures of the global biosphere, hydrosphere, and atmosphere. To this end, you will discover on very careful and thorough examination that my spacecraft contains a wide assortment of technology that does not yet exist on Earth. If you distribute pieces of this craft to various scientists for study, they will be able to reverse engineer some of the technology to the extent that Earth has the raw materials required to replicate those components. Some features will be indecipherable. Other features cannot be duplicated as Earth does not have the natural resources required to replicate them. This is especially true of the metals used to construct the craft. Not only do these metals not exist on Earth, the refining process required to produce these metals took billions of years to develop. It is also true of the navigation system, which requires an ISB spiritual being whose own personal wavelength has been specifically attuned to the quote-unquote neural network of the spacecraft. The pilot of the spacecraft must possess a very high order of energy, volition, discipline, training, and intelligence to manipulate such a spacecraft. ISBs, spiritual beings on Earth, are incapable of this expertise because it requires the use of an artificial body specifically created for this purpose. So this is why people say, I'm interrupting now, this is why people say that the grays, the short grays, pale looking ones, they're like biological artificial intelligence android robots or robots. Certain individuals, Earth scientists, or certain individual Earth scientists, some of whom are among the most brilliant minds in the history of the universe, will have their memory of this technology jogged when they examine the spacecraft components. Just as some of the scientists and physicists on Earth have been able to remember how to create electric generators, internal combustion, and steam locomotion, refrigeration, aircraft, antibiotics, and other tools of your civilization. They will also rediscover other vital technology in my spacecraft. The following are the specific systems embodied in my spacecraft that contain useful components. Number 1, there is an assortment of microscopic wiring or fibers within the walls of the craft that control such things as communications, information storage, computer function, and automatic navigation. Now, remember, if this is 1947, what the alien is or the extraterrestrial is talking about here is fiber optics, fiberglass, fiber optic wires, which that didn't exist until per Colonel Philip Corso. It didn't exist prior to the crash in Roswell. Number 2, the same wiring is, or prior to the crashes that they experienced since 1941. The second would be the same wiring is used for light, sublight, and ultralight spectrum detection and vision. The third, the fabrics of the interior of the spacecraft are far superior to any on Earth at this time and have hundreds of thousands of applications. Number 4, you will also find mechanisms for creating and amplifying and channeling light particles or waves as a form of energy. As an officer, pilot, and engineer of the domain force, I am not at liberty to discuss or convey the detailed operation or construction of the spacecraft in any way other than what I have just disclosed. However, I am confident that there are many competent engineers on Earth who will develop useful technology with these resources. I am providing the details to you in the hope that the greater good of the domain will be served. Chapter 12, A Lesson in Immortality. Matilda's personal notes. This is what she states. I think the following transcript is pretty much self-explanatory. And then it continues, official transcripts, top secret, U.S. Army Air Force, Roswell Army Air Field, 509th bomb, 1947. Okay, so this is the extraterrestrial speaking. Immortal spiritual beings, which I refer to as ISB for the sake of the convenience, are the source and creators of illusions. Each one, individually and collectively, in their original, unfettered state of being, are an eternal, all-powerful, all-knowing entity. This is what they're saying about us. We are individually and collectively, in our original state, a powerful being, eternal, all-knowing and all-powerful. The ISB spiritual beings create space by imagining a location. So what they're talking about here is manifestation. They're explaining that with our thoughts, we can manifest things into being. Humans can. Well, all beings can, but they're talking about Earth spiritual beings. The intervening distance between themselves and the imagined location is what we call space. An ISB spiritual being can perceive the space and objects created by other ISB spiritual beings. The spiritual beings are not physical universe entities. They are a source of energy and illusion. ISB spiritual beings are not located in space or time, but can create space, place particles in various forms, cause the motion of forms, and animate forms. Any form that is animated by an Isby spiritual being is called life. An Isby spiritual being can decide to agree that they are located in space or time, and that they themselves are an object or any other manner of illusion created by themselves or by other Isby spiritual beings. So we decide if we want to come into what we call now physical existence or not. But we're constantly, I call it living or being, I call it being alive, because we don't die, because we just transform into whatever else we want to transform into. The advantage of creating an illusion is that an illusion must be continually created. If not continually created, it disappears. Continual creation of an illusion requires insistent attention to every detail of the illusion in order to sustain it. We're talking about the matrix now, huh? A common denominator between of Isby spiritual beings seems to be the desire to avoid boredom. A spirit only without interaction with other Isbys, spiritual beings, and the unpredictable motion, drama, and unanticipated intentions and illusions being created by other Isbys is easily bored. What if you could imagine anything, perceive anything, and cause anything to happen at will? What if you couldn't do anything else? What if you always knew the outcome of every game, the answer to every question? Would you get bored? Damn, man, it's kicking. Every time I read these things, it's like, it's exactly kind of like what the NDEs talk about. That once they leave their body and they meet with the other energies and they become one, they're all knowing. It's crazy stuff. Okay, let me continue. So the entire back time track of Isby spiritual beings is immeasurable, nearly infinite in terms of physical universe time. There is no measurable quote unquote beginning and no measurable quote unquote end for an Isby spiritual being. They simply exist in an everlasting now. Another common denominator of spiritual Isbys or spiritual beings is that admiration of one's own illusions by others is very desirable. If the desired admiration is not forthcoming, the Isby spiritual being will keep creating the illusion in an attempt to get admiration. One could say that the entire physical universe is based of unadmired illusions. The origins of this, oh man, this is blowing my mind right now. The origins of this universe began with the creation of individual and illusionary spaces. These were the quote unquote home of the Isby spiritual being. Sometimes a universe is a collaborative creation of illusions by two or more Isby spiritual beings. A proliferation of spiritual beings and the universe they create sometimes collide or become commingled or merged to an extent that many spiritual beings shared in the co-creation of the universe. I'm just going to say spiritual beings. You're going to get spiritual beings means Isbys. Spiritual beings diminish their ability in order to have a game to play. Spiritual beings think that any game is better than no game. They will endure pain, suffering, stupidity, privation, and all manner of unnecessary and undesirable conditions just to play a game. Pretending that one does not know all, see all, cause all is a way to create the conditions necessary in order to play the game, Like they say, life is a game. Unknowns, freedoms, barriers, or opponents, and goals. Ultimately, playing a game solves the problem of boredom. In this fashion, all of space, galaxies, suns, planets, and physical phenomenon of this universe, including life forms, places, and events that have been created by ISB spiritual beings and sustained by mutual agreement that these things exist. There are as many universes as there are spiritual beings to imagine. I will repeat that again. There are as many universes as there are spiritual beings to imagine, to build, and perceive them, each existing concurrently within its own continuum. Each universe is created using its own unique set of rules, as imagined, altered, preserved, or destroyed by one or more ISB spiritual beings who created it. Time, energy, objects, and space, as defined in terms of the physical universe, may or may not exist in other universes. The domain exists in such a universe, as well as in the physical universe. One of the rules of the physical universe is that energy can be created, but not destroyed. So the universe will keep expanding as long as spiritual beings keep adding more new energy into it. It is nearly infinite. It is like an automobile assembly line that never stops running, and none of the cars are ever destroyed. Every ISB spiritual being is basically good. Therefore, an ISB spiritual being does not enjoy doing things to other spiritual beings, which they themselves do not want to experience. For an ISB, there is no inherent standard for what is good or bad, right or wrong, ugly or beautiful. These ideas are all based on the opinion of each individual spiritual being. The closest concept that human beings have to describe an ISB or spiritual being is as a God all knowing, all powerful, infinite. So, how does a God stop being a God? They pretend not to know. How can you play a game of quote unquote hide and seek if you always know where the other person's hiding? You pretend not to know where the other players are so you can go off to seek them. This is how games are created. You have forgotten that you are just pretending. In so doing, ISB spiritual beings become entrapped and enslaved inside a maze of their own devise or their own devising. How does one create a cage, lock one's own self inside the cage, throw away the key, and forget there is a key or a cage, and forget there is an inside or outside, and even forget there is a self? Create the illusion that there is no illusion. The entire universe is real, and that no other universe exists or can be created. On Earth, the propaganda taught and agreed upon is that quote unquote the gods are responsible and that human beings are not responsible. You are taught that only a God can create universes. So the responsibility for every action is assigned to another spiritual being or God, never oneself. No human being ever assumes personal responsibility. No human being ever assumes personal responsibility for the fact that they themselves, individually and collectively, are gods. This fact alone is the source of the entrapment for every spiritual being. This is chapter 13, A Lesson in the Future. Matilda's personal notes. This is what she's saying. I think this transcript speaks for itself also. I relayed Earl's exact communications as faithfully as I possibly could. My superior officers became very alarmed about the possible military implications of what the extraterrestrial Earl said in the interview. And then it continues, official transcript, top secret. And this is Earl, the extraterrestrial, continuing to talk. It is my personal belief that the truth should not be sacrificed on the altar of political, religious, or economic expediency. Excuse me. Yeah, okay. This is okay. Expediency. As an officer of the domain, it is my duty to protect the greater good of the domain and its possessions. However, we cannot defend ourselves against forces of which we are not aware. The isolation of the earth from the rest of civilization prevents me from discussing many subjects with you at this time. What I find interesting, the extraterrestrial considers everything in space and the other locations, other galaxies, as civilization, which is really interesting. The rest of civilization out in space, in other dimensions, in other galaxies. The security and protocol prevent me from revealing any but the broadest general statements about the plans and activities of the domain. However, I can give you some information that you may find useful. I must return to my assigned duties on the space station now. I have provided as much help as I feel ethically able to offer, given the requirements and the constraints of my duties as an officer of the domain forces. Therefore, I will depart as an ISB spiritual being from Earth within the next 24 hours. Editor's notes. The following several paragraphs appear to be personal comments made by Matilda to the stenographer, the military stenographer, regarding her interview with Earl. And this is what she stated. What this means is that Earl will leave her, quote unquote, doll, the synthetic body, with us, as her craft is damaged beyond repair. We can examine, we can dissect, and study the body at our leisure. She does not have any further use for it, nor does she have any personal feelings or attachments to it as others are readily available for her to use. So this being, the extraterrestrial, can move from inside body to body. What we would consider dead, they can actually, I guess you can say, disassociate from the body and go to another location. Earl does not recommend that there is any technology in the body that the Earth scientists will find useful, however. The technology of the body is simple, yet vastly beyond the reckoning of our current ability to analyze or reverse engineer in any facet. The body is neither biological or mechanical, but a unique fabrication of materials and ancient technologies not found on Earth-type planets. As Earl mentioned previously, a very rigid and distinctive hierarchy of social, economic, and cultural classes exists throughout the domain, which has remained unvaried and inviolate for many millennia. The body type and function assigned to the ISB spiritual being officer vary specifically according to their rank, their class, longevity, training level, command level, service record, and meritorious citations earned by each individual ISB spiritual being, as with any other military insignia. The body used by the extraterrestrial Earl is specifically designed for an officer of her rank and class. The bodies of her companions, the ones that died in the crash in Roswell, which were destroyed in the crash, were not of the same rank or class, but of a junior rank. Therefore, their appearance, their features, composition, and functionality of those bodies were specialized and limited to the requirements of their duties. The junior officers whose bodies were damaged in the crash have left their bodies and returned to their duties on the space station. The damage suffered by their bodies was due primarily to the fact that they were officers of lower rank. They used the bodies, which were partially biological and therefore far less durable and resilient than hers. At this time, this is the editor's notes. At this point, the transcript appears to resume with statements made by Earl. Although the domain will not hesitate to destroy any active vestiges of the old Empire operations, wherever they are discovered, this is not our primary mission in the galaxy. I am sure that the old Empire mind-controlled mechanisms can be deactivated and destroyed eventually. However, it is not possible to estimate how long this may take, as we do not understand the extent of this operation at this time. We do know that the old Empire force screen is vast enough to cover this end of the galaxy. We also know from experience that each force generator and trapping device is very difficult to detect, locate, and destroy. Also, it is not the current mission of the domain force to commit resources to this endeavor. The eventual destruction of these devices may make it possible for your memory to be restored simply by virtue of not having it erased after each lifetime. Fortunately, the memory of an ISB spiritual being cannot be permanently erased. There are many other active space civilizations who maintain various nefarious operations in this area, not the least of which is dumping unwanted spiritual beings on Earth. None of these spacecrafts are hostile or violent in opposition to the domain forces. They know better than to challenge us. For the most part, the domain ignores Earth and its inhabitants, except to ensure that the resources of the planet itself are not permanently spoiled. This sector of the galaxy was annexed by the domain and is the possession of the domain, to do with or dispose of as it deems best. The moon of the Earth and the asteroid belt have become a permanent base of operations for the domain forces. Needless to say, any attempt by humans or others to interfere in the activities of the domain in the solar system, even if it were possible, which it definitely is not, will be terminated swiftly. This is not a serious concern, as I mentioned earlier, since Homo sapiens cannot operate in open space. Of course, we will continue with the next steps of the domain expansion plan, which has remained on schedule for billions of years. Over the next 5,000 years, there will be increasing traffic and activity of the domain forces as we progress towards the center of this galaxy and beyond to spread our civilization through the universe. If humanity is to survive, it must cooperate to find effective solutions to the difficult conditions of your existence on Earth. Humanity must rise above its human form and discover where they are and that they are spiritual beings, ISBs, and who they really are as ISBs in order to transcend the notion that they are merely biological bodies. Once these realizations have been made, it may be possible to escape your current imprisonment. Otherwise, there will be no future for ISB spiritual beings on Earth. Although there are no active battles or wars being waged between the domain and Old Empire, there still exist the covert actions of the Old Empire, which is taken against Earth through their thought control operation. When one knows that these activities exist, the effects can be observed clearly. The most obvious examples of these actions against human race or the human race can be seen as incidents of sudden, inexplicable behavior. A very recent instance of this occurred in the United States military just before the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Just 3 days before the attack, someone in authority ordered all the ships in Pearl Harbor to go into the port and secure for inspection. The ships were ordered to take all the ammunition out of their magazines, and store it below. On the afternoon before the attack, all of the admirals and generals were attending parties, even though 2 Japanese aircraft carriers were discovered standing right off Pearl Harbor. The obvious action to take would have been to contact Pearl Harbor by telephone to warn them of the danger of the fight starting and to put the ammunition back and order the ships to get out to port into open sea. About 6 hours before the Japanese attacked, a U.S. Navy ship sank a small Japanese submarine right outside the harbor. Instead of contacting Pearl Harbor by telephone to report the incident, a warning message was put into top secret code, which took about 2 hours to encode and then took another 2 hours to decode. The word of the warning to Pearl Harbor did not arrive until 10 a.m. Pearl Harbor time, Sunday, which is 2 hours after the Japanese attacked and destroyed the U.S. fleet. How do things like this happen? If the men who were responsible for these obviously disastrous errors were stood up and asked bluntly to justify their actions and intentions, you would find out that they were quite sincere in their jobs. Ordinarily, they do the very best they can for the people and the nations. However, all of a sudden, from some completely undetectable source, enters these wild, unexplainable situations that just can't exist. The old empire thought control is run by a small group of individuals with very small minds. They are playing insidious games with no purpose and no goal other than to control and destroy is-be spiritual beings who could otherwise manage themselves perfectly well if left alone. These types of artificially created incidents are being forced upon the human race by operators of the mind-controlled prison system. The prison guards will always promote and support oppressive, totalitarian activities against the spiritual beings on earth. Why not keep the inmates fighting between themselves? Why not empower madmen to run governments of earth? The men who run the criminal governments of earth mirror the commands given them by covert thought controllers of the old empire. The human race will continue to shadowbox with this for a long time, as long as it remains the human race. Until then, the is-be spiritual beings on earth will continue to live a series of consecutive lives over and over and over. The same is-bees who lived during the rise and fall of civilizations in India, in China, in Mesopotamia, in Greece, and in Rome are inhabiting the bodies in the present time in America, in France, in Russia, in Africa, and around the world. In between each lifetime, an is-be spiritual being is sent back again to begin all over again, as though the new life was the only life they had ever lived. They begin anew in pain, in misery, and in mystery. Some spiritual beings have been transported to earth more recently than others. Some spiritual beings have been on Earth only a few hundred years, so they have no personal experiences with the earlier civilization of Earth. They have no experiences of having lived on Earth, so could not remember a previous existence here. Even if their memory was restored, they might not, however, remember lives they lived elsewhere on other planets or in other times. Others have been here since the first days of Lemuria. In any case, Lemuria, Atlantic, this is what the extraterrestrial is talking about. Atlantis, Lemuria. In any case, the Isby spiritual beings of Earth are here forever until they can break the amnesia cycle, conquer the electronic traps that were set up by their captors, and free themselves. Because the domain has 3,000 of their own Isby spiritual beings in captivity on Earth. They have an interest in solving this problem. This problem has never been encountered or effectively solved before in the universe. As far as they know, they will continue their efforts to free those Isby spiritual beings from Earth, where and when it is possible. But it will require time to develop an unprecedented technology and the diligence to do so. It reminds me of the Matrix, freeing the mind from the Matrix. Editor's notes. The following statement is a comment by Matilda. And this is what Matilda says about the extraterrestrial. I think it is Earl's sincere desire as one spiritual Isby to another that the rest of our eternity will be as pleasant as possible. Chapter 14. Earl reviews the interview transcripts. This is what Matilda's note says. Shortly after I finished recounting the previous interview with Earl to the stenographer, I was summoned urgently to the office of the commanding officer in the base. I was escorted by 4 heavily armed military PMs. When I arrived, I was asked to be seated in a very large makeshift office that had been arranged with a conference table and chairs. In the office were several dignitaries I had seen at various times in the gallery. I recognized a few of them because they were famous men. I was introduced to the men, which included Army Air Force Secretary Symington, General Nathan Twining, General Jimmy Doolittle, General Vandenberg, and General Norstad. Much to my surprise, Charles Lindenberg was also in the office. Secretary Symington explained to me that Mr. Lindbergh was there as a consultant to the Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force. There are several other men present in the room who were not introduced. I assume these men were personal aides to the officers or the agents of some intelligence service. All of this sudden sudden attention, not only from the secretary and generals, but from such world-famous people as Mr. Lindenberg and General Doolittle, made me realize how critical and how important my role as an interpreter for Earl was, as seen through the eyes of others. Until this time, I was not really aware of this except in a peripheral sense. I suppose this was because I was so absorbed in the details of the extraordinary situation. Suddenly, I began to grasp the magnitude of my role. I think that the presence of these men in the meeting was intended in part to impress me with this fact. The secretary instructed me not to be nervous. He said that I was not in any trouble. He asked me if I thought that the alien would be willing to answer a list of questions they had prepared. He explained that they were very eager to discover many more details about Earl and the flying disc. The domain and many other subjects that Earl had disclosed in the interview transcripts. Of course, they were mainly interested in questions relating to the military security and the construction of the flying disc. I told them that I was very sure that Earl had not changed her mind about answering questions, as nothing had changed that would cause her to trust the intentions of the men. I repeated that Earl had communicated everything that she was willing and at liberty to discuss already. In spite of this, they insisted that I would ask Earl again if she would answer questions. And if the answer was still no, I was to ask her if she would be willing to read the written copies of the transcripts of my interview, translations. They wanted to know if Earl would verify that my understanding and translation of the interview was correct. Since Earl could read English very fluently, the secretary asked if they could be allowed to observe for themselves while Earl read the transcripts and verified that everything was correct in writing. They wanted her to write on a copy of the transcript whether the translations were correct or not, and make a note of anything that was not accurate on the transcripts. Of course, I had no choice but to obey orders, and I did exactly that, what the secretary requested. I was given a copy of the transcripts with a signature page, which I was to show to Earl. After Earl completed her review, I was also directed to request that Earl sign the cover page, attesting that all of the translations in the transcripts were correct, as amended by her. About an hour later, I entered the interview room, as instructed, with the copies of the transcripts and the signature page to deliver to Earl, as the members of the gallery, including the generals and others, watched through the glass of the gallery room. I went to my usual seat, sitting 4 to 5 feet across Earl. I presented the envelope of transcripts to Earl and passed on the instructions I had received from the secretary, and I did this telepathically. Earl looked at me and looked at the envelope without accepting it. Earl said, "If you have read them and they are accurate in your own estimation, there is no need for me to review them also. The translations are correct. You can tell your commander that you have faithfully conveyed a record of our communication." I assured Earl that I had read them, and they were exact recordings of everything told to the transcription typist. And then she stated to the extraterrestrial, "Will you sign the cover page?" I asked. "No, I will not," said Earl. "May I ask why not?" I said. I was a little confused as to why she wasn't willing to do such a simple thing. Earl said, "If your commander does not trust his own staff to make an honest and accurate report to him, what confidence will my signature on this page give him? Why will he trust an ink mark on a page made by an officer of the domain if he does not trust his own loyal staff?" I didn't quite know what to say to that. I couldn't argue with Earl's logic, and I couldn't force her to sign the document either. I sat in my chair for a minute wondering what to do next. I thanked Earl and told her that I needed to go ask my superiors for further instructions. I placed the envelope of the transcripts in my breast pocket of my uniform jacket, and began to rise from the chair. At that moment, the door from the gallery room slammed open. 5 heavily armed MPs rushed into the room. A man in a white laboratory coat followed closely behind them. He pushed a small cart that carried a box-shaped machine with a lot of dials on the face of it. Before I could react, the 2 of the MPs grabbed the extraterrestrial Earl and held her firmly down in the overstuffed chair she had been sitting in. The 2 other MPs grabbed my shoulders and pushed me back down on my chair and held me there. The other MP stood directly in front of Earl pointed a rifle directly at her, not more than 6 inches from her head. The man in the lab coat quickly wheeled the cart behind Earl's chair. He deftly placed a circular headband over Earl's head and turned back to the machine on the cart. Suddenly, he shouted the word clear. The soldiers who were holding Earl released her. At that instant, I saw Earl's body stiffen and shudder. This lasted for about 15 or 20 seconds. The machine operator turned the knob on the machine and Earl's body slumped back into the chair. After a few seconds, he turned the knob again and Earl's body stiffened as before. He repeated the same process several more times. I sat in my chair being held down all the while by the MPs, and I didn't understand what was going on. I was terrified, transfixed by what was happening. I couldn't believe it. After a few minutes, several other men wearing white lab coats entered the room. They briefly examined Earl, who was now slumped listlessly in the chair. They mumbled a few words to each other. One of the men waved to the gallery window. A gurney was immediately rolled into the room by 2 attendants. These men lifted Earl's limp body onto the gurney, strapped her down across her chest and arms, and rolled it out of the room. I was immediately escorted out of the interview room by the MPs and taken directly to my quarters, where I was locked in my room with the MPs remaining at guard outside the door. After about a half an hour, there was a knock at my door to my quarters. When I opened it, General Twinning entered, together with the machine operator in the white lab coat. The general introduced the man to me as Dr. Wilcox. He asked me to accompany him and the doctor. We left the room, followed by the MPs. After several twists and turns through the complex, we entered a small room where Earl had been wheeled and on the gurney. The general told me that Earl and the domain were considered to be a great military risk threat to the United States. Earl had been immobilized so that she could not depart and return to her base, as she said she would do in the interview. It would be a very grave risk to national security to allow Earl to report what she observed during her time at the base. So it had been determined that decisive action was needed to prevent this. The general asked me if I understood why this was necessary. I said that I did, although I most certainly did not agree that it was the least bit necessary, and I certainly did not agree with the surprise attack on extraterrestrial Earl and me in the interview room. However, I said nothing about this to the general because I was afraid of what would happen to me and Earl if I protested. Dr. Wilcox asked me to approach the gurney and stand next to Earl. Earl lay perfectly still, unmoving on the bed. I could not tell whether she was alive or dead. Several other men in the white lab coats, who I assumed were also doctors, stood on the opposite side of the bed. They had connected 2 pieces of monitoring equipment to Earl's head, arms, and chest. One of these devices I recognized from my training as a surgical nurse as an EEG machine, which is used to detect electrical activity in the brain. The other device was a normal hospital room vital signs monitor, which I knew would be useless since Earl did not have a biological body. Dr. Wilcox explained to me that he had administered a series of mild electroshocks to Earl in an attempt to subdue her long enough to allow the military authorities time to evaluate the situation and determine what to do with Earl. He asked me to attempt to communicate with Earl telepathically. I tried for several minutes, but couldn't sense any communication from Earl. I couldn't even sense whether Earl was present in the body any longer. "I think you must have killed her," I said to the doctor. Dr. Wilcox told me that they would keep Earl under observation and that I would be asked to return later to try to establish communication. Chapter 15, My Interrogation. Personal note for Matilda. The next morning, I was escorted from my quarters under the guard of 4 MPs to the interview room. Earl's overstuffed chair had been removed from the room and replaced by a small desk and several office chairs. I was asked to sit down and wait to be interviewed. After a few minutes, Dr. Wilcox came into the office together with another man wearing a plain business suit. The man introduced himself as John Reed. Dr. Wilcox explained to me that Mr. Reed had been flown in from Chicago at the request of my superior officers to conduct a lie detector. My surprise at this statement was so obvious that Dr. Wilcox noticed that I was obviously taken aback and insulted at the insinuation that I had ever lied about anything. Nonetheless, Mr. Reed began to set up the polygraph device on the desk next to my chair, while Dr. Wilcox continued to explain in a calm voice that the test was being administered for my own protection, since all of the interviews with the alien had been conducted telepathically, and Earl had declined to read and attest that the typed transcripts were accurate, that the truth and accuracy of the statements contained in the transcripts depended entirely on my personal word alone. There was no other reliable way to test the accuracy of the transcripts without submitting it to a battery of tests and psychological examinations to determine, in the opinion of the experts, meaning himself, whether the transcripts should be taken seriously or not. The tone of his voice said very clearly or dismissed as the delusional rant of a mere woman. Mr. Reed proceeded to strap a rubber tube around my chest, as well as an ordinary blood pressure cuff around my upper arm. He then placed electrodes on the fingers and surfaces of my hands. He explained that he would be very objective during the interview because he had been thoroughly trained in scientific interrogation. This training was supposed to make his interrogation free from human error. Mr. Reed explained to me that in response to the questions he and Dr. Wilcox were going to ask me, that actual physiological changes would be transmitted through a small panel unit. The readings would then be tracked on moving graph paper, which he placed beside the machine on the desk. The parallel graphs on the paper would then be correlated and interpreted by Mr. Reed with the expert assistant of Dr. Wilcox to determine whether or not I was lying. Both Mr. Reed and Wilcox asked me a series of innocuous questions to begin, which advanced into a more pointed interrogation about my interview with the extraterrestrial Earl. This is what the questions were. Here's what I remember about the questions. What is your name? Matilda O'Donnell, I replied. What is your birth date or date of birth? June 12th, 1924, I said. What is your age? 23. Where were you born? Los Angeles, California, I said. And so on and so forth. Are you able to communicate by telepathy? No, I have never been able to do this with anyone except Earl, I said. Were any of the statements you made to the stenographer falsified? No, I answered. Have you intentionally or unintentionally imagined or fabricated any of these communications you claim to have had with the alien? No, of course not, I said. Are you intentionally attempting to deceive anyone? No. Are you attempting to obstruct this test? No. What color are your eyes? Blue. Are you Catholic? Yes. Would you tell the same stories to your parish priest in a Catholic church confessional that you told to the military stenographer here at the base? Yes. Are you trying to hide anything from us? No, nothing. Do you believe everything the alien communicated to you? Yes. Do you consider yourself to be a gullible person? No. The questions continued in this manner for more than an hour. Finally, I was unhooked from the polygraph machine and allowed to return to my quarters, still under guard by MPs. Later in the afternoon, I returned to the interview room. This time, the desk was replaced by a hospital gurney. Dr. Wilcox was accompanied by a staff nurse this time. He asked me to lie down on the gurney. He said that he had been requested to ask me the same series of questions that I answered for the lie detector test. This time, however, I would respond to the questions under the influence of truth serum, known as sodium pentothal. As a trained surgical nurse, I was familiar with this barbiturate drug, as it was sometimes used as an anesthetic. Dr. Wilcox asked me if I had any objection to submitting to such a test. I told him that I had nothing to hide. I cannot recall anything about the interview. I assumed that when I finished answering the questions, I was escorted to my room by MPs with their assistants this time, as I was too wobbly and woozy from the drug to navigate myself. However, I had a very peaceful sleep that night. Apparently, neither of these interrogations yielded any suspicious results, as I was not asked any more questions after that. Thankfully, I was left alone during the rest of my time at the base. Chapter 16, Earl Departs. Matilda's Personal Notes. I remained at the base, mostly confined to my quarters, for another 3 weeks after Earl had been incapacitated by Dr. Wilcox. Once a day, I was escorted to the room where Earl lay on the bed under continued surveillance. Each time I went to the room, I was asked to try to communicate with Earl. Each time there was no response. This saddened me a great deal. As the days continued, I began increasing more certain and distressed that Earl was dead, if that is the right word for it. Every day I reread the transcripts of my interview with Earl, searching for a clue that might remind me of something or help me in some way to reestablish communication. I still had the envelope in my possession with the copies of the transcripts that Earl was asked to sign. To this day, I don't understand why no one ever asked me to return them. I suppose they forgot about the copy of the transcripts in all the excitement. I did not offer to return them. I kept them concealed under the mattress of my bed all the time I remained at the base, and have kept them with me ever since then. You will be the first person to see these transcripts. Since Earl's body was not biological, the doctors could not detect whether or not the body was alive or dead unless it moved. Of course, I knew that if Earl was not consciously animating the body as an Isby spiritual being, the body would not move. I explained this to the doctor. I explained this to him several times. Each time he just gave me a patronizing sort of smile, patted my arm, and thanked me for trying again. At the end of the 3rd week, I was told by Dr. Wilcox that my services would no longer be needed because it had been decided by the military to move Earl to a larger, more secure military medical facility that was better equipped to deal with the situation. He didn't say anything about where the facility was. That was the last time I saw Earl's body. The following day, I received written orders signed by General Twining. The order said that I had completed my service to the U.S. military and was officially discharged from further duty, and that I would receive an honorable discharge and generous military pension. I would also be relocated by the military and given a new identity with appropriate documents. Along with the orders, I received a document that I was instructed to read and sign. It was an oath of secrecy. The language of the document was full of legalese, but the point was very clear. very clearly made that I was never to ever discuss anything whatsoever with anyone about anything I heard or experienced during my service in the military under pain of death as an act of treason against the United States of America. As it turned out, I was placed into a federal government witness protection program, except that I would be protected from the government by the government. In other words, as long as I stayed quiet, I could stay alive. The following morning, I was placed on board a small military transport plane and flown to a relocation destination. After being shuttled to several locations for short periods, I eventually ended up in Glasgow, Montana, near Fort Peck. The night before I was scheduled to board the transport plane, as I lay in bed contemplating the whole affair and wondering what happened to Earl and to me, I suddenly heard Earl's voice. I sat bolt upright in my bed and turned on the light and the nightstand. On the nightstand. I looked around the room frantically for a few seconds. Then I realized that it was Earl, the spiritual being, the Isby. Her body was not in the room with me, of course, and it didn't need to be. She said hello. The tone of her thought was plain and friendly. It was unmistakably Earl. I did not have the least doubt about that. I thought, Earl, are you still here? She answered that she was here, but not in a body on earth. She had returned to her post at the domain when the doctor and the MPs attacked us in the interview room. She was pleased to perceive that I was well and that I was going to be released unharmed. I wondered how she escaped from them. I was worried that they might have injured Earl by the shock machine. Earl said that she was able to leave the body before the shock was administered and avoided the electric current running through the body. She wanted to let me know that she was safe and not to worry about her. I was very relieved, to say the least. I asked Earl if I would ever see her again. Earl reassured me that we are both Isby's spiritual beings. We are not physical bodies. Now that she had located me in space and time, we would always stay in communication. Earl wished me well, and my communication with her ended for the moment. Postscript. Editor's note. The following message was enclosed in a separate envelope marked Read Me Last. Together with the original letter, the transcripts, and the other notes of explanation I received in the envelope. This is what the message said. The other documents in this envelope are the end of the story. As far as what happened back in 1947, however, several months after the government got me settled at my final relocation destination, I continued my communication with the extraterrestrial Earl on a regular basis. It has been almost exactly 40 years since the crash at Roswell. Since then, it has become obvious to me that I have been able to communicate telepathically with Earl for one reason. I am one of the 3,000 members of the Lost Battalion. At this time, all of the members of the Lost Battalion have been located on Earth as a result of the Domain Anunnaki mission and their use of the Tree of Life detection device. Through my communication with Earl, I have recovered some of my memory of lives I've spent on Earth over the past 8,000 years. Most of these memories are not especially important compared to the long backtrack of events, but it has been a necessary stepping stone to regaining my awareness and ability as an Isby spiritual being. I can also remember some dim patches of my life in the domain force. I was a nurse there too. For the most part, I've been a nurse over and over and over again down through the ages. I stick with being a nurse because it is familiar to me, and I enjoy the work of helping people, as well as members of the race of the biological beings in the domain, whose bodies look more like insects than mammals, especially their hands. Even the doll bodies, meaning the synthetic bodies, need some repair once in a while. As I remember more about my past, I realize that the rest of my life is in the future. Eternity is not just in the past. Eternity is in the future. At this point, I am still not able to fully return to the domain. I am sentenced to eternal imprisonment, like all the other Easby spiritual beings in the living hell called Earth, until we can disable the old Empire Force screens. Because I won't keep my biological body much longer now, I am intensely aware that very soon I will be recycled through the amnesia process of the old empire and stuck back into another baby body to start all over again without any memory of what went before. So they're talking about reincarnation. And this is the things that many people are talking about, that reincarnation is a trap that we don't recognize, that many religions don't recognize as a trap. As you know, members of the domain force have been working to solve this problem for thousands of years. Earl says that even though the domain has located all the lost battalion officers and crew, the success of freeing them depends on the Isby spiritual beings who are already on Earth. The domain's central command cannot authorize any personnel or resources at this time to conduct rescue missions, as this is not the primary mission of the domain in this galaxy. So if Isby's spiritual beings on Earth are going to escape from this prison, it will have to be an inside job, so to speak. The inmates will have to figure out how to get themselves out. Various methods of recovering the memory and abilities of Isbys have been developed over the past 10,000 years, but none have proven to be consistently effective. Earl mentioned that the most significant breakthrough was made by Gautama Siddhartha, Buddha, about 2,500 years ago. However, the original teachings and techniques taught by the Buddha have been altered or lost over the millennia since then. The practical techniques of his philosophy were perverted into robotic religious rituals by priesthoods or priests as a self-serving instrument of control and slavery. However, another major advance occurred recently. An acquaintance of the commanding officer of the domain force space station is an Isby spiritual being who had once been an important engineer and officer in the old Empire space fleet. He became an untouchable himself about 10,000 years ago and was sentenced to Earth for leading a mutiny against the oppressive regime of the old empire. The engineer was trained in advanced scientific improvisation theory thousands of years ago. This man has applied his expertise to helping the domain solve the apparently unsolvable problem of rescuing the members of the Lost Battalion, as well as the Isby spiritual beings of Earth. Careful observation and experimental analysis of these mechanics of memory in Isbys by he and his wife, who assisted him, led to the realization that Isby spiritual beings can recover from amnesia and also regain lost abilities. Together, they discovered and developed effective methods that they used to rehabilitate their own memories. They eventually codified their methods so that others can safely be trained to apply them to themselves and others without detection by the old empire thought control operators. Their research also revealed that Isby's spiritual beings can occupy and operate more than one body at a time, a fact that previously was not thought to be uniquely limited to officers of the domain. One example of this fact is that the engineer in a previous lifetime on Earth was Suleiman the Magnificent. His assistant was a harem girl who rose up from slavery to become his wife and rule the Ottoman Empire with him. Simultaneously, she inhabited another body and ruled her own empire as Queen Elizabeth, as the Queen of England. She never married because she was already married to the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. In a later life, he was incarnated as Cecil Rhodes. During his life as Rhodes, she was again a princess, this time from Poland. As such, she pursued Rhodes unsuccessfully towards the end of his life. However, in their next incarnation, they met again, were married, and had a family, and again worked together successfully all of their lives. Several other notable examples of this phenomenon were observed. For example, the process of refining steel was invented by the same Isby spiritual being who inhabited two bodies simultaneously. One was named Kelly, who lived in Kentucky, and the other was a man named Bessemer, who lived in England. They both conceived the same process at the same time. Another example is Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone, which was invented by several others at the same time, including Elisha Gray. The telephone was conceived concurrently in several locations around the world all at once. This was a single Isby spiritual being of such tremendous energy and ability that he was able to operate several bodies in several different locations while conducting complex research work. Thanks to these revelations, the domain has been able to return some of the Isbys of the Lost Battalion to active duty on limited part-time basis. For example, two young girls who occupy biological bodies on Earth are now at the same time working as active members of the domain force on the asteroid space station, that operators of the communication switchboard. These operators relay messages between the domain force and the domain command headquarters. Recently, I myself have been able to resume some of my own duties for the domain force while continuing to live on Earth. This is not an easy task, however, and can only be done while biological body is sleeping. It makes me very, very happy to know that we may not have to stay on Earth forever. There is hope for escape, not just for the Lost Battalion, but for many Isbys, spiritual beings on Earth. However, all Isbys could be helped to become more aware of the actual situation on Earth through the information in this envelope. This is why I sent these letters and transcripts to you. I want you to get the documents published. I want Isbys, spiritual beings on Earth, to have a chance to find out what is really happening on Earth. Most people will not believe any of it, I'm sure. It seems too incredible. No reasonable person would ever believe a word of it. However, it only seems incredible to an Isby spiritual being whose memory has been erased. Memory is erased and replaced with false information inside the electronically controlled illusion of a prison. We must not allow the apparent incredibility of our situation to prevent us from confronting the reality of it. Frankly, quote-unquote reasons have nothing to do with reality. There are no reasons. Things are what they are. If we don't face the facts of our situation, we're going to stay under the thumb of the old empire forever. The biggest weapon of the old empire has left now is our ignorance of what they are doing to us on Earth. Disbelief and secrecy are the most effective weapons they have. The government agencies that classified the enclosed transcript top secret are run by Isby spiritual beings who are nothing more than mindless automatons, covertly ordered about through hypnotic commands given by the old empire prison operators. They are the unknowing slaves of unseen slave masters, and all the more enslaved by their willingness to be slaves. Most of the spiritual beings on earth are good, honest, able beings, artists, managers, geniuses, freethinkers, and revolutionaries who have harmed no one, really. They are no threat to anyone except the criminals who have imprisoned them. They must find out about the old empire amnesia and hypnosis. They must remember their own past lives. The only way this will ever happen is to communicate, coordinate, and fight back. We have to tell other people, and they have to discuss it openly with each other. Communication is the only effective weapon against secrecy and oppression. This is why I'm asking you to tell the story. Please share these transcripts with as many people as you can. If the people of Earth are told what is really going on here, perhaps they will begin to remember who they are and where they come from. For now, we can begin our own release and rescue with words. We can be free again. We can be ourselves again. Perhaps I will meet you in person, with or without a body, somewhere in our eternal future. Good luck to all of us. Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy. End of Mrs. McElroy's documents. Then they have the appendix, footnotes, and other things. They talk about the radio broadcast of War of the Worlds, the invasion from Mars. They get into the Majestic 12 documents, Majestic 12, MJ12. Oh, and tomorrow I'll get into the supposed alleged manual that was distributed to the officers of Majestic 12, where it talks about how to deal with encountering extraterrestrials and their technology. We'll get into that tomorrow. That's let me see here. And then they talk about, super secret, magic eyes only, top secret information. Albert Einstein. They talk about Vannevar Bush, Robert Oppenheimer. They talk about Einstein and Oppenheimer were called in to give their opinion, drafting a 6-page paper titled Relationships with Inhabitants of the Celestial Bodies. They provided prophetic insight into our modern nuclear strategies and satellites. Then they talk about all the crashes prior to the 1947 crash of Roswell, the extraordinary recovery of fallen airborne objects in the state of New Mexico between July 4th, July 6th of 1947. Then they have a special unit was formed in 1942 in response to 2 crashes in Los Angeles. So before Roswell, the New Mexico, there was 2 crashes in Los Angeles in 1942. And then there was another incident in Texas in 47. And then the first ever UFO crash retrieval occurred in 1941 in Cape Girardeau in Missouri. This crash kicked off early reverse engineering work, but it did not create a unified intelligence effort to exploit possible technological gains apart from the Manhattan Project. And then they continue talking about cold fusion, magnets, electrodes in 1947 from these crashes. Then it talks about Harry Truman, who kept a technical briefing document of September 24th, 1947, for further studies pondering the challenges of creating and funding the secret organization before the CIA, which was called the CIG, Central Intelligence Group. And that was in April 1954, a group of senior officers of U.S. intelligence community and the armed forces gathered for one of the most secret and sensational briefings in history The subject was unidentified flying objects and recovered crashed UFOs, where to ship the parts, and how to deal with the occupants. And then it goes on and on and on. More top secret stuff. So again, tomorrow we'll get into the manual on how to deal with extraterrestrials and their craft. All right, guys. Thank you for watching this little mini series of these documents. Even if it's not real, let's just say it's not real. It's a great story, very detailed, but it seems like most of the stuff that was being said on here, I believe it. When we get into the actual manual tomorrow, you'll see what I'm talking about. All right, guys, stay safe. You want to support, the links are in the description. You want to support monetarily, Cash App, PayPal, Bitcoin. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye.